optimism is a much better driver than living in sort of a state of fear.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Max Borders. He's the editor of the Freeman, and he's the co-founder of the Voice and Exit conference held annually in Austin, Texas. Max, thanks for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
So talk about Voice and Exit. Now, this is an annual conference in Austin, and the kind of ethos of Voice and Exit.
The ethos is interesting. I think the best way to describe it is, what would the world look like in a post-political age, where we start to collaborate more, we start to innovate and use entrepreneurship and innovation instead of the political process. But it's not just about, political theory, although that's an interesting aspect of it. It's also what kind of interesting things you can do with community that's perhaps tech-enabled. What kind of interesting things can you do with biohacking and personal optimization, neurofeedback, and so on. So explore all avenues of human flourishing, really.
One of the main threads that ties together everything you're doing is kind of techno-optimism. It's where you're oriented towards the future, and you're loving it. You're not afraid, you're not wetting your pants, you're not wetting anybody else's pants. Where does your techno-optimism come from? And talk a little bit about how it is actually helping the third world in particular in terms of disruptive innovation.
Sure. Well, on the first part of the question, I'd say really what drives me personally with techno-optimism is, on the one hand, I think people are either naturally optimistic or pessimistic in a certain way. I don't know if it's inherent or what, but I tend towards being an optimist, and so I want to bring that to my work. It's sort of natural as breathing. Optimism is a much better driver than living in sort of a state of fear up in the amygdala part of the brain, rather than
Why do you think libertarianism, I think there's certainly a long, strong strain of pessimism and of paranoia or, kind of anger, and I think that's true of everything on the spectrum, but why is that attractive to libertarians?
That's a great question, and it's one of the things I think. If you look at it purely from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's like, oh, no one's doing hope and change in the libertarian movement, or few people are.
Right.
We need more of that, and that's why I'm so happy we got to talk about it today, because optimism really drives movements.
So talk a little bit about Argentina and some of the ways in which, that's an example where technology is really enabling kind of positive disruptions.
Exactly. Clayton Christensen is the guy who really came up with the term disruption to describe a process whereby people who, had little means and little interest in complicated technologies were really driven to something simple and accessible first, and that would suddenly ascend through the market strata and begin to take it over. That's really what we're seeing with the blockchain. Yeah, we've got geeks here in the United States who love it ideologically, they want to play with it, and yet they live very comfortable lives. But when you are a desperately poor person, or you're living in a country like Argentina that has 1,000% inflation, sudden adopting these technologies is of necessity. It's not a question then of whether it's cool or trendy or whatever. It's really about necessity. So I actually believe that Bitcoin is going to, and the technologies that come out of it, which you guys have thoroughly covered, is really going to happen in the developing world first and come back.
So is there a big kind of Bitcoin surge in Argentina?
There is.
So, and it's a place like that where you have a government that you have a currency that is not particularly stable, you have high inflation, you have an unpredictable government in terms of shutting this down or shutting that down. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin gives people a way out of that immediate circumstance to maintain or gain some control over their everyday existence.
Well, and it can be that. It could be contracts between people. It can be land titles. There are other applications that people are starting to look at, particularly in these places, because they're seeing Moore's Law's effects happen and landing right in their hands. So if you've got somebody with a smartphone with no other infrastructure, and they're able to delineate their land, their property, and they're able to compare it with each other, and suddenly you have sort of emergent law happening because of this, and communities of people who recognize these land titles, that is the basis of essentially the common law being introduced to the developing world without the imprimatur of the leaders there, the corrupt and often, crony-bought leaders.
And it's not like an imperial nation coming in and drawing lines.
Which has happened too, and it's not to say that doesn't work. So, for example, that's how Hong Kong was made. I think it was the opium wars between Britain and China. Hong Kong emerged because they had sort of the institutions as residue of colonialism.
Right.
Nobody wants to celebrate colonialism, but certainly what they left behind in good rules is something to be admired from everywhere in the world. Now you've got situations where you can't get that kind of toehold, whether it be through conquest or be through convincing local governments, a la Honduras and Zayda's legislation, that you can have these free cities. Sometimes you have to build them in the cloud, and that's what's going on. This is unfolding before our very eyes. It's extremely promising for the people in the developing world. So yes, while we have reason to be sort of suspicious and gloomy about an impending crash that is likely to happen, maybe Peter Schiff will be proven right again, we also have a reason to be very optimistic, because so much of the parallel structures for what is being lost or being destroyed by government policy is being recreated in the cloud, and people will migrate to the cloud en masse if they can.
Well, we will leave it there. That's a kind of uplifting vision of ascending to the clouds, right? It's like the rapture, but you don't have to die to get there. So.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. We've been talking with Max Borders. He's the editor-in-chief of the Freeman. It's the flagship publication of the Foundation for Economic Education. And he's also the co-founder of Voice and Exit, an annual conference about innovation and change that's held in Austin, Texas. Max, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.